Live from Derbyshire, this is the Sunday Lunch Show with Brent Poland. And you are listening live.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Teachers Talk Radio with me, Brent. We are live and we're looking forward to hearing you today about the future of education policy. Especially in light of the fact that there is no future of education policy because education policy has been scrapped.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org or join in the conversation by downloading the Podbean app and following Teachers Talk Radio. #TT Radio.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. The curse of us and technology, I think, has got the better of us. If you're just tuning in, apologies for that kind of dodgy start. It's just after 1 o'clock now. On quite a wintry day in Derbyshire, Brent, have you been out and about today?
I have seen the big man himself. I have definitely seen him. He recommends that I am on the good list. I am not on the naughty list.
Okay.
I took my children to see Santa Claus in a windmill in part of rural Derbyshire, which is awesome. And it was really cool. And they were very charming as always. They're terrible to us, but they're really charming to strangers. Isn't it always funny how kids are nervous around Santa Claus? Did you have that problem when your kids were younger?
I think it's just the kind of anticipation. So there's like anticipation, nervousness. I mean, genuine fear, I guess, if you're not going to get what you want from Santa.
I mean, we took them on one of those fantastic train rides, one of those sort of Santa Claus train rides. As soon as Santa Claus came anywhere near my children, it was like just basically screaming at him.
Yeah.
Because he was, scary. So I wonder if that's something that's perfectly normal. My version of Santa Claus was a whole lot different to these days' versions of Santa Claus. Because our version of Santa Claus was doom and gloom. He knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. And pretty much for 6 months of my life, I was threatened with Santa Claus is not coming. Santa Claus is not coming. Santa Claus is not coming. You've been naughty. And you sort of think about that and go, wow. That is some pure gaslighting from your parents, isn't it?
Yeah. It's an odd one to kind of get right, really, isn't it? As well as at what point you tell that story, as well to children. And we've had a conversation because it's definitely one of the things with my younger daughter where the lack of socialization over COVID, that COVID gap. Their age group is particularly stalled, and it's great because they hold their innocence for a bit longer. They can have these stories, and the magic of Christmas is still there. But it's one of the things that obviously shows because of the lack of socialisation around COVID as well. And that'll always be a theme, I think, for the next couple of shows, won't it? About what that gap is, how it's going to be filled. And it certainly leads us on to the news this week about the white paper being scrapped, dropped. We were just talking before, what is the right language for a government that just doesn't do anything? Is it scrapped? Is it just not doing anything? Is it dropping something? Is it just not doing stuff? I mean,
I suppose
what language do you use for something now?
I suppose the thing of it is it's postponed. Mothballed is another one.
Mothballed.
And mothballed is an interesting one because it's what you have with airplanes that are chucked out to the middle of the Nevada desert. I love those photographs of fleets of B-52 bombers, and what it means is that they can be brought back at any stage. And I don't like that situation. I don't like that situation because some people could be in a situation where they are, waiting for something to happen that doesn't. I feel it limbo. So there's a lot of language about this is scrapped, but ideas just don't go away. Things do tend to go around in circles. Something that might be scrapped may actually come back later on as a policy for somebody else. And if this does happen over time, you do get a situation where people sort of think, oh, we've done that. And then it's done and dusted and the policy is no longer. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, actually, we're going to bring this back. And if you've been in education as long as we both have, you see that things become cycles. It's interesting looking at this week was there was a lot of news stories, and especially in the last couple of weeks, I think the new education minister got feet under the carpet. A lot longer than previous
Yeah,
education
I mean,
ministers.
this is now one of the longest.
We've got one of the longest serving education
Yes, that's
ministers in
right.
living record,
Yeah.
a couple of weeks they've lasted. I mean, the merry-go-round that was the education department has now settled down, and maybe they have had a bit of a look at what their vision is for education. And at the moment, it's obvious that the opposition political party has their vision for education, which we're still struggling to get our head around,
Yeah.
because their big headline was about the taxing of private schools. But looking between both political parties, I don't really see at present a kind of a blur-eyed equivalent of what we got in the 1990s. I don't see. I mean, Rishi Sunak said himself that there is a silver bullet, to help level up economy and etc. Education be it. So there's a lot of food moves, but there isn't. It seems, I would say, actually minutiae of detail yet. So there's ideological stuff being sounded out. And looking at the news stories, you can see there is, okay, no more new grammar schools, but we're not going to scrap the existing ones. Okay, we support private education, but we're going to tax VAT private education. So you're seeing a lot of skirting around the private, the education bill that was scrapped was going to push for eventually every school to be part of a multi academy trust, and that was scrapped. But that's not to say they're not going to continue with the policy, but not formally continue with the policy. So multi-academy trusts are here to stay. And what it leads to is a very confusing education sector that has various different types of schools. And where you are in the country might mean you get a grammar school, a private school, a good grammar school. You might get, a good comprehensive that's part of MAT, or a faith-based comprehensive part of MAT. It's an absolute minefield, and yet nobody seems to want to take the bull by the horns and actually sit down and root and branch think, what are we trying to achieve with education policy?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those kind of classic arguments that definitely we've had recently. We had some training. I think the trainer started the training talking about swans and how it's easier to lead and to go in the same direction if you all know what you're doing. I think this is one of the problems that's certainly in the last 5 years has been problematic in schools. Is kind of what is the objective? What is it that we're trying to you know have for the children, have for society, have for the economy now? Because that's the big thing that's shown the impact, is what is the impact on the economy of this lack of skills. We're starting to see that coming through with our growth rates really poor across compared to other countries. And we both, obviously now, we're seeing it from the kind of bottom end as well, aren't we? Our kids are in school, and we kind of I'm looking at the stuff they're coming home with, and I'm thinking, wow, this is stuff that I did at school nearly 30 years ago. However, the whole society has moved on, but there's not been a kind of overarching kind of strategy in terms of what we're doing for years. Would you reckon? I mean, when was the last time there was a big? I mean, you mentioned Blair, education, and those kind of big standout policies there. Did Cameron kind of skirt the?
Yeah, I suppose David Cameron, he valued education, and although I was not a big fan of him, I certainly now I'm looking back at the halcyon days of war. I mean, is it me, or I have to ask myself two questions: am I in education long enough and have become more cynical, or has things deteriorated? And it's a little bit. It might be a little bit of both. And it's the same with like the school you're in. If you're in a school like mine for such a long time that I'm in, you have to evolve and you have to constantly change with the times. That means that education has to change with the times. However, here comes the caveat. There are some things in education that never ever should change. And I often say this when people will have a go at me being not the greatest planner in the world, and I'm not. I'm never going to be that teacher. I'm more of a fly by the seat of my underpants type teacher, and then I go and something comes out organically. And I love that about teaching, is that you don't have to have a set way of doing things. But over my course of my career, I've had to adopt new ideas, new strategies, take things on board, and adapt. And I think some of the new ideas are brilliant. Some of the new ways of teaching are brilliant. Some of them are absolute fads, and we've seen fads come and go, haven't we? We've seen things come in, and you go, this will never work. But I don't get the sense that there is an overall direction of travel. I don't get the sense that there is a vision or a plan for education. And that's ironic because as I've got older and my responsibilities have changed, I've had to change how I plan. And now I plan that far ahead that when somebody comes along and says to me, oh, sorry, we're doing something different, I start to get a little bit angry, which is a bit of a, it's going to be ironic. People have known me for years, are going to have a right chuckle about this. But I get really sort of annoyed with it because I planned all this. And it's things like, planning my lower school scheme of work to assist my upper school scheme of work. And then halfway through your course, somebody comes around and says, no, 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 we're changing this. But I geared up a certain way. And it's like, all of a sudden, we're teaching children a knowledge based curriculum. It's not, we're scrapping that. And you think, but what about all those years that we taught children a certain way? All of a sudden, it gets scrapped. And I just feel that there is too much ideological sometimes and none of evidence based when it comes to education. And it's unfortunately a political football, which leads to education policy being driven by ideological needs rather than actually what we believe is needed. And that's in turn, I find it interesting that the schools bill, which was a flagship policy, by the way, was scrapped. And by another name, you call that a U turn. Now, the unions are happy about that because they protested against it, because unions are opposed to multi academy trusts. Now, I'm not, and Adam and I discussed this, and we don't want to get too into the minefield of multi academy trusts because we are where we are. And some of us work in multi academy trusts, and some multi academy trusts are good multi academy trusts.
Right.
Some multi academy trusts can do better, and some multi academy trusts have been found out.
Yeah, there's a bell curve like any system. There's a bell curve of good. I guess most are just trying, and this is no reflection of the people involved at all. They're trying to manage a system that, in some cases, kind of working against them as well to try and get through. But yeah, so you're right. There's a bell curve of very poor attaining academy trusts. The majority of schools obviously fall within the middle, and there's some excellent examples as well. And I think there's one thing we can discuss later, really, maybe because we're going to go on to faith-based education next week. We still want to do that, don't we? Sorry, we did mention it last week that we're going to go on to it this week, but we just wanted to get it right. We want to see if we can get a guest to contribute as well, because I think it's a really important one. Is that there are now a field, I guess, of so many different types of schools, and it goes back to that question sometimes with parents. Where do I send my child? As well, we mentioned that last week, didn't we? About where do we send our child? What are all these things about? Does anyone really explain all the technicalities of what an academy is, what a faith-based school is, what a free school is, what a independent school is, what a kind of private school is, what a UTC is, like where I am, what is a these kind of hybrid schools that do a little bit of selection based on socioeconomic kind of banding. They take in different bits, the kind of the Landau Forte type groups kind of do that. It's just a minefield, isn't it, for a parent? If you're trying to think, right, where do I send my child?
And it's geographical, absolute postcode lottery, because it changes from county to county, location to location, and that does mean in a country the size of England, your standards can vary massively. And again, I point to the lessons learned during COVID, that we saw the rogue algorithm was just not able to. You were trying to impose a standardized algorithm and a mathematical equation on a completely randomized education. And that's why I believe that rogue algorithm was there, because there are human factors you can never call into play. And that's the thing with education. They're always trying to say league tables and standardization. But there's so many variables. We're dealing with children, for starters. You're dealing with different backgrounds, different locations. And I think there needs to be a bigger conversation about the inherited education system that seems to be added to. And over generations, we are where we are, with a very convoluted, confusing, and dare I say it, unfair education system, which seems to discriminate against some and obviously advantage others. And those who are culturally capital enough, aware enough, driven, motivated enough, and who have advantages, therefore know how to game a system like our education system. And therefore, as a result of that, we see outcomes which are leading to undesirable outcomes in society, where we have areas of the country where children can't read and write. I mean, how is it possible some children go through education system in the sixth wealthiest country in the world and not read and write? But then I'll point to this little news story. I like this one. You're going to like this one. This is my news story number 27. And because I like going through the news and finding some of my news stories.
You know, in schools when they say don't do death by PowerPoint. I mean, if you had the view that I had now.
This one's really good, right?
Okay, so, but this PowerPoint is a good PowerPoint. It's not the 2004, 2005 PowerPoints we used to have at school where stuff had to come flying in from me.
Well, it was that MPs had to sit some exam questions that the children, I think 10-year-old children, and quite a lot of our MPs actually failed. So they actually they couldn't actually pass the questions. And I was again involved in a discussion last night on national radio. Should our MPs have a qualification, or should they test their MPs before they get into Parliament? And it was an interesting conversation of like, well, they could not do what some of our year 10s did. They didn't have basic literacy or numeracy. And it was finding out some of the MPs just basically would not have the skills of our average 10 or 11-year-old child.
Yeah, George, it's on here. So it's the so you can't find it. So it was in the Daily Mail. 12 MPs failed maths SATs test, which 71% of year 6 is passed. Half missed the mark of spelling and grammar, which is 72% passed. And the quote from Labour's Emma Hardy said, "Results show tests are harmful for students." Or does it? Or to just say that students is better than MPs at?
Well, but isn't that the point? I mean, there you have, by one measure, our children are outperforming our MPs. Now, many people in the general public might have a chuckle about that and go, "That's about right." But doesn't it tell you? And it opened up a conversation I had with the presenter, who was my generation, my age, and he was lamenting and saying, children now, they learn to the exam. And I said, well, they do. But at the same time, these children are doing more exams than I did at their age. They are, in many ways, more intelligent than I was. But I also made the point, the standard of teacher that I am is a hell of a lot better than the standard of teacher that taught me. And that's no disrespect to my former teachers. Some of them, I'll be honest with you, wouldn't pass in the current education system because it was take out a book and read. And it was literally, but then the emphasis, here's the thing, the emphasis was on the child. I failed my exams. It wasn't the school or it wasn't me. It was the child and my parents who had to take responsibility. And I think we've gone a bit too far now, where it's the school. And I think that was the crux of our last broadcast was, the life changes and how you can change your life and how your life can be altered by the decision to go to a different school. And I do think schools are a rescuing factor which can influence and change your outcomes. But also you yourself, the child, plus your parents, are also the rescuing factor. And in the end, when it comes down to it, we elect the people in the country to make decisions. Some of them wouldn't pass the exams, our children would, but we still elect them all the same. And they in turn make decisions that we vote for. Because in the end, it's a democracy. And when political parties come up with policy, when they get elected, they institute those policies of which they say they have a mandate to institute. So, sorry to put this on to the great British public. We are where we are with education because of the decisions that the British people have made as regards education. Now, if they want to change education policy, they have a route to change it. So, that's why we will see these policies driven towards a certain end. And unfortunately, I do think sometimes they are gamed towards a certain individual who votes certain ways. And I think that's where, unfortunately, our education policy is not for all. It is then used as a way to manipulate people.
Yeah, to form a narrative with a voter.
Narrative to vote.
Yeah.
And that's not what is healthy for our children, because that means that they are a narrow group of individuals in society who are upwardly mobile, who happen to go to the ballot box, will dictate an education policy for the majority.
Yeah. So how many people vote as a percentage, UK?
There's 49 million registered voters. Of that, about 60 odd percent of people actually vote in a general election.
Vote, and then the winning party would get
35 to 40%. There was a huge margin last time of 40%, which secured 59% of the seats.
So you're saying that 30 odd percent of the country basically dictate the narrative.
Less than that.
Dictate the narrative of education.
You're 2 to 3 million floating voters, which always makes me think of people flying in the air. 2 to 3 million floating voters tend to decide which way the political parties go.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the policies sometimes are directed towards those 2 to 3 million floating voters who happen to be.
So we call that kind of Overton window, that kind of gap.
Yeah. And because some people will always vote certain ways, in some areas it doesn't really matter. But it's also, where does education come as regards policies? Where does it come in the ranking order of priorities? It comes economy comes tops of priorities. Then it's the NHS, and then it's defence, and you've got I think education is about fifth or sixth.
Yeah.
It's mid-table.
But I think what we're seeing right at the minute is where the Venn diagram hits, isn't it? We're having economic problems. We're having health issues.
Skills shortage.
Yeah. Because of education problems. Do you know what I mean? I think this is where maybe politicians haven't really kind of got a grasp of this, is that they're all interlinked.
No, because they haven't thought. Here's the irony. They haven't thought like we do to think long term, strategically.
Yeah, strategically.
We as teachers think of long term strategic. I've got a child at year 7.
Yeah.
I want to get them through to year 11. I'm going to be their history teacher. I've got 5 years to get them ready.
That's right.
But 5 years to educate them. So I can see their transition. And I will pitch my work to them at a certain level, at a certain age, scaffolded, do my ZPD, do my GOTSCI. I won't, it's like a maths teacher won't start with algebra if they can't count. We know how to build up over time a child, and not just work upon their academic, but work on the soft skills, work on the personality. By the time they get to year 9, they hate everybody because the hormones kick in and the adolescent brain kicks in when they're 14. So we know this, and we plan accordingly over a long period of time to get the outcome that we want. That's what good teachers do, don't we? We long-term strategically think about that. Our governments are set up for 4-year cycles, 4 or 5 year cycles, where they go, we'll do this policy now, score some runs, and then move on, and then the next group come in. And what I'm suggesting there is, and it's not trying to be too political, and what I'm trying to say is, our policies are directed by the needs of the party in charge, and that would be the same for any of the political parties that have been in charge in this country. And therefore, as a result, education is a constantly changing mosaic, depending on the priorities of that political party to whatever group in society they're trying to court or win over. And the most classic example of that was Blair, education, which appealed to middle-class voters who wanted their children to go to university and who had aspirations. And they keep I'm the party of aspiration. It's like, stand up if you're the party of aspiration. And everybody claims to be the party of aspiration and meritocracy.
Yeah, there's currently the party of perspiration.
But in reality, that they do make policies, and sometimes they do make good policies, and that goes for all the political parties. Sometimes they have, and sometimes they get good education ministers, sometimes you don't. But it's the constant pot looking and the constant kind of, right, here's the next person coming in, here's their emphasis, and then it filters into Ofsted, and then Ofsted filters down to us. So we're like all of a sudden constantly, whoa, new idea, and you're like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But the basics of education should never be changed. The basics about education should always be there. I mean, Socrates and myself shouldn't be too far apart. You know what I mean? The essence of what we're trying to achieve and the essence of teaching, it wouldn't matter if I'm a football coach. Take the World Cup in football.
Oh, David. Come on.
Well, what I'm going to say is a football coach, Bill Shankly now, or Sir Matt Busby, or who's the England manager who won the World Cup?
Alf Ramsey.
Sir Alf Ramsey. Yeah. Gosh, I can't remember that. Or Jackie Charlton. Oh, I love Jackie Charlton.
Come on.
But the basics of Jackie Charlton, Alf Ramsey, Bill Shankly, Alex Ferguson. What was the basic? Do you tell me now that Alex Ferguson wasn't a manager now, he'd still be successful? Mm-hmm. But what is Alex Ferguson? He was a role model. He was a teacher. He was a coach.
Yeah, he was a teacher.
Arsene Wenger was a teacher. Yeah. Gerard Houllier was a teacher. A lot of football managers. Tell me that if you didn't have a class and your classroom teacher was Jurgen Klopp, oh my word, could you imagine Jurgen Klopp as your teacher? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
He would, but of course he would be amazing. But that's the thing. A good football manager. Gareth Southgate last night, God bless him. First thing he did went over and he spoke to Harry Kane, and I knew the conversation was going to be like, I know what it feels like, mate. And you looked at the two of them and you thought, that's classy. Well done, Gareth Southgate. Well done. You know Harry Kane's what he's going through. You can empathise with him, and he knows it too. And it was very classy from the manager. And that you can see it was good management. That wouldn't matter what generation you're from. It's the same with education. Education is always going to be education. The purpose of it is to improve children, develop children, give them skills. But in the meantime, there is a bunch of people constantly making policy, constantly trying to change things, and constantly making promises. And unfortunately, I think quite often they make unattainable promises that are difficult to achieve in order to score points. And it's the same across a lot of policy areas, from transport, health, and everything else. And I think education is no different. But what it has left us with is a mosaic, a very hodgepodge education system, which works in some ways. And then us at the centre, us teachers, trying to jury rig it, trying to work between the lines, trying to sometimes ignore this, sometimes embrace this, sometimes kind of like being forced to do things that we don't ideologically agree with ourselves. Because each one of us, as practitioners, as professionals, are encouraged to do CPD. And there's nothing worse than the cognitive dissonance of a teacher being asked to do something in a school that completely flies in the face of their own educational philosophy, or completely flies in the face of all the evidence of all the educational, pedagogy books they've read, and yet they're being, I'm sorry, we have to do this. Why? Because, and it feels a bit like.
Well, the only headline always is to raise standards, isn't it? But it's quite as a practicing teacher on the ground, it's quite hard to kind of, well, obviously, we all want that, don't we? No one wants the standards to drop. No one wants the child to be disaffected, disadvantaged.
Well, just like a football manager doesn't want to lose.
Brilliant. Right, should we go to the news?
We should go to the news.
And we'll come back to that. So there's a couple of people just joining the live room. So welcome, everybody. Please feel free to make comments. We haven't got a salad Dodger today.
Whatever the Dodger is.
Go on, Dodger. And so always please feel free to call in. It'd be great to actually for us to see what that button does.
I think we know what that button does.
We know what that button
I think it would just happen for us to have the power and the back and forth.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to go to the news, and then we'll be back with you shortly.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
TES magazine reported on news that Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said that the proposed schools bill will not progress in this parliamentary session. The bill itself was originally launched in May this year and covered a range of areas including school attendance, safeguarding and new powers over multi-academy trusts. Ms Keegan spoke at the Commons Education Select Committee, confirming that the schools bill will not progress in the third session. She also said her department remained committed to the objectives and would be prioritising some aspects of the bill. Of the aspects of the bill Ms Keegan stated she wanted to focus on, she identified the need for a register to identify and account for children not in schools, as well as helping more faith schools join multi-academy trusts. One area not seen as a priority, however, was the creation of more grammar schools, with Ms Keegan stating her strong views that 93% of children will never get to go to one, and the belief that the academy structure remains the route to make the biggest difference to the most children the quickest. The Mirror Online carries a story about Labour MP Zara Sultana's proposal to widen the free school meal scheme in primary schools across England. Under the plans, all primary pupils would get access to free school meals. The current scheme for universal free school meals ends in year 2. The article suggests that under the current plan, around 800,000 children living in poverty miss out on free meals due to the strict eligibility criteria. Ms Sultana will bring forward a bill in the coming week. The MP for Coventry South said it was a major issue when families simply can't afford everyday groceries, and that providing meals for school was another strain. She went on to point out that both Scottish and Welsh governments have plans to introduce universal free school meals, but accused the government in England of prioritising tax breaks for the wealthiest people. Warwickshire World online news site reports on the arrival of delegates from around the world to a conference focusing on developing technical education. More than 50 visitors attended the event organised by the British Council at Warwick Trident College. The college is part of the WCG group. Guests arrived from a range of countries in Africa and Asia, with delegations including government ministers and education officials. A spokesperson for the WCG said technical education is one of the key pillars of a successful developing economy, and that the hope was that delegates would take away some insights which will have a positive impact on their country's developments in technical and vocational training. The latest Sunday Times Schools Guide has been released, and many local news outlets are reporting on the successes of schools in their surrounding areas. Northern Ireland outlets report that the guide has rated 7 secondary schools in the national top 50, calling this a significant achievement in light of the nation's comparatively small population. It was acknowledged that several of the Northern Ireland schools mentioned in the list have been described as highly selective grammar schools, with the DUP's Diane Dodds noting that whilst Northern Ireland is punching above its weight, there will always be areas where improvements can be made. She went on to point out that the list as a whole is dominated by expensive fee-paying schools. Finally, Keele University has launched the UK's first law undergraduate degree designed to help tackle the climate crisis. The new course in Law with Environmental Sustainability is the first of its kind in the UK. It has been developed to create legal professionals with a good knowledge of environmental obligations on governments and communities. Professor Alison Brammer, head of the School of Law at Keele, said, "The climate crisis affects everyone, and we need legal professionals who understand the issues we face." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Yep.
So that was quite interesting. I felt some of those news stories which are directly relevant and also directly relevant to one of the previous podcasts we had. But certainly, I find it interesting about the schools in Northern Ireland that some of them actually are known to be they are on ability, not ability to pay. There's a bit of a difference there, although there is the 11 plus system or the transfer test system. So it does come with a caveat again that although it is a selection, the selection is on ability. And it does lead to positive outcomes. So it is something that took me a while to get used to when I transferred over to England 20 odd years ago and started teaching here. Getting my head around obviously the different education system, and then again there's a different education system in Scotland. So you've got a different education system in Northern Ireland, different education system in Scotland, and then in Wales you've got a separate system, and it's meant to be the United Kingdom, and even in that you get the regional variations, you get the local variations. It just sort of feeds into that overall point I keep wanting to make about the fact that we don't have a top down. When you look at the league tables of a country. Should you just separate out Scotland from the rest of the UK? Should you separate Northern Ireland out and say, look, okay, Northern Ireland's part of the United Kingdom, but its education system's not, and therefore, should it be if you were to treat Northern Ireland or Scotland and England and Wales as separate entities? wonder where they would be. And it'd be an interesting place
Yeah.
somewhere. I'm sure there should maybe a broadcast in that somewhere along the
Yeah, I
line.
think
don't
so.
know.
Well, I think it brings in what we talked about earlier about all the different types of schools in the UK. Excuse my ignorance, Brent. Can you just kind of just quickly go through Northern Ireland? What is the general? Because obviously Scotland has hires and a different kind of exam system.
Well,
What is the system?
The
in
north
Northern
and the
Ireland?
south are different. They're very, very different. The south, they have what's called Leaving Cert at 17, which is our equivalent of A levels at 17 rather than 16. So they don't have the GCSEs. Northern Ireland follows the same system.
Right, the key difference is they spend a year longer within the kind of secondary
They do
side,
in the Republic of Ireland,
Yeah,
but they do exams a year later, and they do 7 rather than 3 or 4 A levels. The north of Ireland is in many ways similar to the UK in the sense that you still have 11 till year 7. You've got your secondary school, 1 to 6 is your primary schools, etc., and then you've got your GCSEs and your A levels. But what is different is about the location of the schools that people go to. There are a couple of private schools, but the bulk majority of people attend either a comprehensive or a selective grammar school. The difference is the grammar school is based upon an exam called the selection exam, and it used to be the 11 plus, but they felt that the old 11 plus, which was like basically your cognitive test, wasn't producing the outcomes. It's the one I failed because it was like John lives next door to Jim, Jim lives next door to Bob, and I'm like, I was the kind of kid going, I can tell you the capital of Madagascar is Antananarivo. I can tell you what that science is, and but I never was gamed enough to go. And people could be game to it. So that transfer test used to separate people from a secondary school, which is equivalent to an English comprehensive, versus a grammar school. And the whole idea was it's a bit like having sets in a school, your top sets and your middle sets and your bottom sets. But even within my secondary school, my comprehensive secondary school, there was still setting going on. So there's a lot more streaming in Northern Ireland, and a lot more streaming and where people could go to a grammar school. And some of the grammar schools in Northern Ireland took in a huge amount of people from impoverished backgrounds. So there is a definite difference in the sense of access to education was less about your economic background and more about your actual academic ability. However, the weakness of that was it could be gamed like everything else, but also the other weakness is some people develop later in life, like myself. And therefore, what you had is a situation where some people were going to the grammar school too early, peaking too early, or getting fed up with being pushed all the time and push at grammar schools because they are more pushy because they have a reputation. Whereas at the secondary school, you've got more freedom to develop at your own time, which suited me. But the other side of that is that there was this idea always that those that failed the 11 plus were seen as lesser people, in second class, not as clever. And a lot of the kids would do that too. They'd say, "Oh, you go to the stupid school with the stupid kids." And I will say it's left an ideological tracer on me. That it's one of the reasons why I've always had this conversation with people about sets versus not sets, and I've always been against setting children because again, it goes back to my philosophy of I embraced the Carol Dweck scenario of the self-fulfilling prophecy. For many of my friends that went to the secondary school, they were made to feel inferior, they were made to feel as if they weren't clever, and they were judged at 11 years old. And I think that was too early for some people to be judged. In my instance, it didn't bother me because my parents overrode it and said, "Don't worry about it, son. You'll get your exams next time." So I had a supportive family who almost said, "We know you'll get there," and they supported me through it. I mean, it didn't stop it hurting. I tell you, it was one of the most traumatic days of my life was failing at 11 plus because I had to face up to people, even a lot of my cousins. And it did make you feel good about yourself. And I didn't say I would have lost my confidence. It did knock me back. When I got my GCSEs, which were decent GCSEs, and then went on and got really good A levels, there was an element where I remember, I forget the conversation when I was in getting my exam grades the day before a lot of people in the other grammar schools. And my grammar school gave me the grades the day before. And I was in the pub celebrating with my friends, and then overheard a conversation with somebody in the background going, "How did he get that? He went to the stupid school with the stupid kids." And that's how harsh that is when you are at that age, kind of already sort of suggesting here are the clever people and here are not. And of course, one of the things I try in education always is to give every child the opportunity, regardless of the perceived level of ability, That's why, when I do peer and self-assessment, I will take the child's name off the peer work. And sometimes it's interesting that the children might go with preconceptions about certain children's ability. So that's what you have in Northern Ireland. It is a very successful system, but it's not a perfect system, and it does have some social trade-offs, of which, again, like every other system, it works for some people, it doesn't work for other people, but overall, it does seem to produce, as that news story was suggesting, what you're looking for.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're looking for a success story. And I suppose the irony is I'm a success story myself out of that education system, because I went to the grammar school and I was able to go to a grammar school at 16. And it was not because my parents had money. My dad's a plasterer, mum's a housewife. So as much as I could criticise elements of the system, I'm a success story because of it, but not because of the school. I think, again, it's down to the values and the virtues of my parents overriding that.
But I guess the question is always kind of what is success, isn't it? That's what's never been kind of very clear to me, is what is success. Success for one person is, getting a set of A stars. Success for another person is getting through the whole system. Success for some people is learning some key life skills. What is success? And it's interesting, a documentary series on BBC at the minute with Amol Rajan, the How to Crack the Glass Ceiling, which I thought was interesting in the week. Kind of how is it schools need to teach a certain class code? Is that what a school is? To teach that? So that there was all these people, like there was a girl from a woman from Nottingham, and she got the qualifications, success. She got the right experience, success. She had the confidence, success. Was she able to finally become a barrister? No, because at the last minute, this thing called class just dwarfed all that. And during her ceremony in Nottingham to, pick up a kind of qualification, somebody actually came up to her in the arena and said, "Oh, I hear you got a kind of regional accent. You kind of basically say you probably won't get very far as a barrister." Like straight away on the day that she picked up the certificate. So it was made abundantly clear to her that success for her was to become a barrister. She'd done all those steps, but at the last minute, it was just taken away from her. Anyone that kind of you go and watch it for yourselves, because that was kind of my takeaway. Is that again, what is success? I, average to high qualifications. However, what I was left with from secondary education was confidence, and that confidence probably has taken me further than the qualifications themselves.
That's soft skill.
That soft skill. So, would I have been in the same position with kind of slightly lower grades? Probably. At the time, my parents were looking at success as kind of qualifications. However, as it happens, the fact that I've been able to kind of do this, do a radio show, talk to loads of people over the years, be able to stand up in front of people, has all come from kind of confidence rather than the actual qualifications themselves. And going back to kind of what we said about MPs, I do homework now with my daughter this morning. I can't answer the stuff on there, but
during lockdown, did you see some of the stuff coming home from primary?
Yeah,
well, honestly,
yeah.
It's phonetics. It's phonetics is witchcraft sometimes to me, especially with a regional accent. But imagine I leave the phonetics to my wife, because I think with my regional accent, poor child will go back into school and start phonetically doing things a little bit different. I mean, there's an interesting thing with phonetics. Does it work? Like I was saying that to my colleague who's a French teacher the other day, going, do I realise when I speak French, do I speak French with a Northern Irish accent?
Well, we've literally had this conversation.
Bonjour, ça va? Ça va bien, merci.
We've had this conversation this week because we have a lot of EAL students, and it's not necessarily the just the words. It's the kind of the contextual understanding of those words as well. Which kind of hinders a lot of students, and then it's the whole cultural thing about kind of qualifications. The conversation we had this week was that a lad who'd been largely educated in Pakistan, and had got through their kind of system, comes into our school as a high achiever, but all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Because it's just so different.
Yeah.
So he's kind of in a bit of in shock mode at the minute,
Yeah.
a genuine shock mode of I thought I was going to be all right,
Yeah.
working the way I was currently working, but this system's so different.
Yes.
So again, it's that meaning of education is so
It's values and virtues.
it's laced within the context of the people, the culture, and I think that's what we've got to get to in the end. Is
I think schools can help.
Yeah.
But I think going back to it, my school, in some ways, I learned how to fight. And I'm not talking physically. I'm going to stay quiet on that. It was the 1990s. But I learned how to stand up for myself. I learned that through failure, and this is the key thing, through failure comes deferred success. It's that idea of picking yourself back up with the canvas. It's that idea of, it's the Rocky mentality. And I love my Rocky movies. It's that desire of you hit me down. It's the Labri Sifi, something inside so strong. I know I can make it. And that, for me, is what education journey has to be. Some people get knocked down once. Some people get knocked down all the time. It's getting back up again. I'd say that
knocked down,
I
get
get
up again.
And then we're going to keep it going.
Great.
And I have so many examples of a lot of my friends like that. I mean, my best friend, for instance, he failed his GCSE English 3 times. He had to go back to school, and then we discovered later on in life that he's got a special educational needs. And of course, it was obvious, but that was never going to be picked up because the assumption was, oh well. I remember my teacher turned around into him and I going, oh, you might pass your exam on a good day. You've got no chance. And that's what we were up against. We were up against kind of like, you're on your own. And there I am recently looking at exam results and saying, what part do I play in the child's exam results? Actually, I play a significant proportion to a certain extent, but I'm not the deciding factor. And I think schools are now seen as kind of resolving everything. And again, when you're making policies, you've got to say to yourself, these promises about driving up standards, more exams, and it seems that they always seem to come out with more rather than better quality. Or it's all about the data, not about the person. And we both agree on this, that the things that defined me was not on statistics. I remember my university lecturer as a social scientist, and I got to university at 18, and he sat down and we had a really good conversation, and he got to know me. He says, look, tell me your story. And then he crunched the numbers and says, statistically speaking, you shouldn't be at university. I says, what do you mean? He says, well, look at your parents' background. I look at the fact you failed 11 plus. I look at the fact of your background. And it was one of those like, wow, okay, put it all together then. And he was saying, statistically speaking, I shouldn't have been at university. But why was I there? I was there because I overrid all of those statistics. I had a student a couple of years ago and had a school improvement partner in, and he came around the classroom and looked at this child's work and he said, oh, he's a level 4. Not a chance this kid's a level 4. He's a level 9. It can't be. It was the grades, the Fisher Family Trust, or whatever this data they spit out, told him that this child was pupil premium, free school meals, kid group, all of those tick, 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 postcode, tick, 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 tick. His raw data told him that child was a level 4, maybe level 5 on a best day. And I'm looking at him and I'm going, that child is not. That child has all got the motivation, the fire, the hunger, the desire. I'm looking at a mini version of me a couple of years ago. And I can see exactly what this kid's going to do in a year's time. And I can see what direction he's going. And I can see at the moment his work isn't there yet. But I know, I can see it. I can see this child developing. And I had to override and say, no, I'm not putting down that grade. That child is going to do. And guess what the child got? 11-9. Still couldn't read his work some days. But you just know it, don't you? You just know the success that some people have built upon those things that they've got, those hidden skills, those deeper hidden skills. And too often
the X factor in terms of education.
And too often we're driven towards, going towards the data. Going back to the schools bill, Gillian Keegan admitted that the schools bill introduced this year with a promise to raise education standards across England has been dropped, which sounds pretty bad, because then we're going to have this flagship policy which is going to raise education standards. And there it is again. It's as if the standards are low. Oh, we're going to raise standards, raise standards. I feel schools are a bit like a business. They have to constantly make a profit.
Yeah.
The business is breaking even, it's not doing well. It's this idea of marketization of education. That, unless schools' league tables are always on top, then they're somehow failing. And you know this to be true. You taught in a school 15 years in a community. That was a really good school that serviced that community.
Yeah.
And for me, the only thing that happened at that school wasn't that all of a sudden the teachers became bad, wasn't all of a sudden that the pupils in the area became bad. It was they calculated the league tables differently. They changed the exam syllabuses to be less vocational, and they undermined the school that was an engineering and technical type school that was sending kids of a working class nature with skills and who had talents.
Yep.
And I'm trying to make them write essays
Yeah.
because Mr. Gove decided this is what is his ideological theory behind education. I want everybody to write essays like I did in the 1960s in a grammar school. And that school went from
It's just no
outstanding.
time. Yeah. Well, we literally fell through the charts, as it were.
Yeah.
It was almost like a kind of like we're like at one stage, 2008, 2009, we were the ones going out to other schools.
Yeah,
and
outreach.
and outreach and saying, look, this is what we're doing. We had kids doing the land and environment, because it's a rural school. So doing the land and environment based qualifications, but they're actually on farms. They're actually spending most of their day in a farm, birthing calves. So they were kind of actually their knowledge and their learning and their education, if you want to put that in inverted commas, was so real, so in context, that they went on to do incredible things within their fields. Well, again, it was what you're saying. We weren't allowed to do those qualifications because of, I guess, Ofsted.
So that kid who could have been learning, agricultural skills on a
Was
farm,
was then doing kind of computer science with me.
which the last thing they wanted to be sitting in a classroom. No disrespect to you,
Yeah.
learning computer science,
No.
because they were not the type of children that learn that way.
Well, it wasn't necessarily about they were the type of child, but straight away, their whole kind of outlook was different. They are then targeted because of their previous academic attainments. I am then basically telling them that they are doing this GCSE, which they kind of, passively either wanted to or not wanted to, depending on the child. I'm then telling them that they're only going to get a grade 2, 3. So then they can't really see the whole purpose of it anyway. But then during that, we're then telling them that they are below that anyway, and they're in intervention. So so the whole kind of morale and confidence of the whole place just completely fell apart.
And then you're told all of a sudden, because
So
you're told
five,
all of a sudden you're not good enough.
so the conversation would have been 5 years ago, you're going to be a great farmer. You're going to be you're going to do really well in agriculture, agritech, whatever. You're going to be a high flyer in that industry because of the qualifications you've got, the experience you've had from a young age, and that hands-on understanding, the contextualization.
That school also had a relationship with employers like Rolls-Royce.
That's right, yeah. So
engineering apprenticeships.
Yeah, so the conversation then goes from me basically, like a like-for-like child within 5 years, basically saying you are, all they're hearing is constant underachievement. You're underachieving. Five years ago, you're overachieving. And that, motivationally, has got to have a massive impact.
Yeah.
It's got to, but it then had a massive impact on the staff.
Well,
So staff morale went, and then to the point where
I think it impacted on the community.
then it starts impacting on the community, because the whole community then feels that, because the outcomes of the children, they don't have a direction either.
And then children leave. Parents, socially mobile parents, say, okay, the standards of the school are dropping,
Yeah,
and out they go.
yeah.
And they take their children with them,
Yeah.
which then damages the league table standing again. It's a bit like a football team losing some football players, and they jump ship into another team, and then they get relegated, and you're in a downward spiral.
Yeah, but do that Venn diagram that I just talked about. You know what happens with failing schools and house prices? People leave, don't they? There's a brain drain.
It's a negative multiplier.
There's a multiplier,
Yeah.
and then that impacts health outcomes.
Crime. social
not
statistics.
not to touch on your other life, but you now know that that community then hasn't got the confidence to stand up to kind of other things that are happening in their area that they don't maybe want to.
They don't vote.
They don't vote.
Participate.
Yep.
They're
engage,
easily bullied.
Yep.
They disengage. They lose heart. They lose hope.
Yeah.
And they lose fight.
So I think this is why we're so passionate about this all the time. It's because of the wider implications of a education secretary.
Thank God.
Not actually. I think this is where we've said before. Maybe we don't. Maybe I've said maybe in inverted commas. A lot of people didn't agree with kind of the Goveism of education. However,
there were some elements that I could agree with.
But what you can say about Michael Gove is there was a direction. There was a thing. There was a philosophy. There was a philosophy.
And I didn't agree with some of it. But
where are we now? That's the big question.
I could agree with some others. I benefited from it in some aspects as a history teacher because history was reprioritised under the baccalaureate. But then again, that's where schools got this wrong because all of a sudden schools panicked and went, we must have kids doing English, geography, history, ICT, and history. And then you're like, all of a sudden there's people in my classroom and I'm going, are you intrinsically motivated? Did you take my subjects GCSE? No, I have to do it because of the back. French and language. Spanish teachers were absolutely apoplectic because they had students sitting in front of them they'd never had before going, did you choose this subject? No, we have to do it because we have to get our baccalaureate score. And you're like, oh no. So great idea, but in practicality, poor execution.
Yeah.
So yes, Gove had some good ideas and as an intelligent individual, I think he's a very clever man. And as an education minister, some of the standards he brought in, absolutely fine with that.
Yeah.
He had presence, he had strength of mind, he was convictionless. Parts about him I can admire, but he didn't listen to some of the evidence about, especially schools like the school used to teach in. They were fine as they were. They didn't need to be reformed. They were doing a good job considering the kids they had and the communities they had. They just needed to be, that's the context of that school. That school's doing a good job, but it's all about how you measure it. And it goes back to this whole idea of raising education standards has been dropped. She also said that the Education Select Committee, their flagship education legislation, which was the Schools Bill, included plans for a register of children not in school. We don't have a register of children not in school. There's apparently 100,000 children who are somewhere in extinct, especially since COVID. I think that's an absolute scandal. It's an absolute scandal. I know that they haven't got trial of that hold that there are some children at the moment who are unaccounted for within education systems. Off-bullying as well. There's a lot of stuff going on where people are just falling through the cracks. What we're saying about the social ills of that, county lines gangs, addictions, violence, youth crime, drug, it had all these things up. And society pays for these problems because these children don't have a quality education, which means they've got no future, got no hope, and they're easily recruited by radicalisation. They're easily recruited into things like gangs. But then also they don't make the right choices in life because they don't have. And then here's the cyclical problem. They themselves, when they start to have children, they're not able to pass on to their children their values and virtues. And that then leads to this cyclical problem in some communities. Breaking the cycle is difficult because you have a generation of young people there that have just been falling through the cracks. And I think that's a massive, massive problem they need to get a handle on. What we also saw as well is that the big thing about their schools is that they plan to have every school join the multi-academy trust by 2030. That's a big headline figure of all schools must be multi-academy trusts. And I know that's where the fight was going to be, because I think where we're at the moment is that the low-hanging fruit of multi-academy trusts is kind of now being exhausted. You're now into the schools that would resist and the communities that would resist. And I know that I've spoken to some of my friends who have got children in, especially primary schools. And when I mentioned, would you want your child in a multi-academy trust, there was an absolute daggers at dawn, not a chance. I want my child to be in a local authority school. And I know how I feel about that. And I'm not going to try, I'll give my opinion, and I'll try and be balanced about it. I'll try and be balanced about it. If they decided to multi-academy trust my child's primary school, I'd be outside there with a court saying that chance. I'll tell you the reason why. It's fine as it is. It's a good little school. I, as a parent, am extremely happy with it. My wife is a governor of that school, and my friends who send their children to that school as well are satisfied with the current situation. Therefore, it's not open that the school doesn't need that. What it does need is it needs a couple of extra staff. It needs a couple of new buildings. It needs a football pitch that's not got more a sticker in struggling to work. It would be sky high every time, never mind 1 or 2. The thing is that it needs a lot of things. It doesn't need multi-family trust. It needs funding. It needs a lot TS, but it doesn't. What it doesn't need is to be brought under the multi-academy trust and then changed. It's fine, same as what your school was a couple of years ago. So that's why I would have that view on it. And some people could disagree with that and say they've got great examples of their school which was failing and brought under the umbrella of a multi-academy trust and is successful. I know there are examples of that. And then there are others who are going to say that their school was fine as it was. They were promised going into a multi-academy trust would release economies of scale, they would earn more money. This would be corporate, they'd be really good, there'd be career opportunities, and it hasn't worked out like that. There are people that have left schools because the multi-academy trust has an ethos, and if you don't match that ethos, then you're out. And that's what's been happening to some teachers up and down the country. You almost now have to match the multi-academy trust to your own philosophy a little bit. So there is a little bit of that now, or some teachers are searching for not just the school. They have to look at the multi-academy trust and say, can I work for that multi-academy trust? What is their reputation like? And equally, it's up to preference. So one person's multi-academy trust from hell might be another person's multi-academy trust from heaven. But that's the problem is that we have a system now which is so different and variations are so high. I do long for the days when you had a local government. And one of the things that I liked about local government was I was a government in school, 2 separate occasions. 20 people in a room making decisions about that school. 2 members of staff, parents, foundation governors, chair governors, and the head teacher. And you had a committee of people, and it was just about the head teacher. He had to bring his stuff to that committee, and everybody got a say on it. And I like that, and I tell you why I like that. That was democracy. And that is people talking, listening, and then sharing within the community. And every single person within that room had the best interests of the school at heart. Not how much money, not about money, about education. All were governors because they cared. And that's where I think we've lost a little bit of element of decision making when it comes to people being accountable to schools. When you look at the number of people going to the press, the last couple of years there's been an explosion of local news stories. Child kicking off about her policy, mother kicking off about the child being excluded, new policy from new multi-academy trust about uniform, her policy, walking down a corridor, her socks. It seems that the press seems to love these news stories. You pick up a local newspaper, there's probably a news story about, I think that multi-academy trusts have lost the connection that you would have in local communities because they're now part of a family of 25 schools stretching over a geographical distance. I think you lose that connection, that community, that context that works at an individual lower level, as opposed to now you're part of a multi-academy trust which stretches even nationwide. And that's what I think we're losing the essence of education. In a way, maybe that's why they put the brakes on this policy. However, it will still continue to academize, but they're not going to force academisation. So they haven't abandoned academisation, and this is a familiar story because it's like grammar schools. They're not going to build any new grammar schools, but they're not going to scrap them.
Yeah.
Private schools, they're not going to close them down, but Labour wants to tax them, but the Conservative Party are going to keep them. Academies, multi-academy trusts are here to stay. They're not going to force people to join them, but they're going to encourage people to join them. So where are we in education?
Yeah, but that's because that all sounds a bit kind of focus groupy, doesn't it? In terms of policy, because if you look to the data, and I've just picked this up from the local government website, is that if you look at, again, you talked about Michael Gove kind of not looking at evidence, is that the evidence suggests at the minute, just suggests, okay, I'm not saying this is kind of one measure, again, if we're looking at success, is that 92% of council maintained schools, or the old LEA schools, are rated outstanding or good by Ofsted in January 2022, compared to 82%. So if you look at certain measures, and
the only problem I have with that statistic might be, and this is me playing devil's advocate, is would the schools that were failing have gone into multi-academy trusts because they were pushed into multi-academy trusts? So that might be a misleading statistic, because what you might have there is those are the schools that were already very good, therefore there was less emphasis on converting them to quote unquote raise standards.
But the essence of the white paper really was to look at almost encourage, as you said, this kind of soft word, encouraging all schools to be academies, weren't they? Or to be part of a multi-academy trust.
It was the future. That was
the future.
That
was the big strategic. That was the plan. Yeah.
That was, and that's the point. Is that we had a couple of years ago a plan, and we all knew that plan was that eventually schools were going to be all part of multi-academy trusts. Yeah. Some schools decided to say to themselves, "Okay, if this is the direction of travel, what we'll do is we'll jump now." So my multi-academy trust was like that. Why wait till we're told to go? Yeah. We'll go on our terms.
We'll build the relationship.
We'll bring the schools that we want to. And I would actually use the word. Here is the actual word. We will take the schools that we want to rescue. Yeah. So this was done from a Catholic school point of view of like, instead of, and the idea was if there was a failing Catholic school within a certain geographical area, instead of having it taken over or vulturized, cannibalized by another multi-academy trust, what we would do is to ensure its survival and also to protect it, we will take it as part of our multi-academy trust and look after it. So I know that the desire to create the multi-academy trust that I'm part of was done from a sort of paternalistic point of view. It was done from a natural point of view of protecting schools of a similar type from forces that could be seen as predatory. Now, in itself, when you think of it like that, that's almost like, yes, I'm going to merge the business with my mergers. I mean, it's venture capitalism.
It's like a hedge fund coming in and kind of stripping the assets and moving.
But you're talking about education, and you're talking about businesses' practices of like, we're going to amalgamate our resources in order to protect ourselves from the unfavorable conditions of the current business climate. I mean, talking about schools and education, and then you realize, and I have to say, have schools been stealthily privatized to a certain extent?
Well, the assets definitely have got on paper they have, haven't they? I mean, Adam Curtis talks a lot of this in his work about kind of moving state assets into private hands, and that has been the plan since Thatcher. It's part of the neoliberalist agenda, isn't it?
But you can't do that if, and here's the interesting thing, you can't do that if you go back to the very purpose that there are people out there with opinions about education. And there's a kind of battle for hearts and minds, isn't it? And of which I have my opinion of it because I'm a teacher and also a parent. Yeah. But it is a battleground, isn't it? It is a battleground to win over public opinion in order to say
all the time.
What do the stroke, I hate the word, the people desire from their government for their education system. And it does come back to that core question of what is the priority of education? What is its function? What is government's meant to do? And much like the direction of travel in government now, there seems to be again a retreat of, here's your education policy, sort it out yourself. You go on ahead. I tell you what, you be in charge of education policy. We'll just check up every once in a while when things aren't going well. There does seem to be a retreat.
However, I think what's really interesting about that battleground currently is that there's so many disaffected voices. There's teachers, there's parents, there's the city, there's CBI, there's small businesses. There's so many people now saying,
you could say the critical mass.
I think so. That this thing, and this is probably why
the blob of education,
the education secretary is actually maybe she's come in as a sensible person. I don't know a great deal about her. Do you? I mean, I don't know. Maybe let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that she's actually come in, read the reviews at once, looked a bit long term, and said, actually, we can't just do this thing quickly. And actually, all the other education secretaries, because they've been in there such a short amount of time, have not been able to do the rigor and the reading and all that around it. And actually, when you look at each group and you go, right, well, let's do this. Well, actually, parents will be upset by that because the outcomes of that might cause
It's a bold move.
well-being issues.
If she's put a stop on it,
Yeah,
it's a bold move.
teachers will then kind of have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Actually, that doesn't fill the skills gap of this. This doesn't do this. So it's again, where does education sit within that Venn diagram? And actually, what do we then need to do to ensure that the people voting for us?
Are we sponsored by them today? No, we're actually sponsored by Witherslack and also John Cat Education.
Yeah. But I'm going to get some T-shirts, by the way, that say, what did you say? I'm going to do my Vygotsky.
Vygotsky.
I do my Vygotsky by Brent Poland.
I do my Vygotsky. I do. I love his EP.
Not to digress, but I thought about a T-shirt last week for you where you said I'm a walking advertising board or something, recruitment tool. I just think for me is there are so many disaffected kind of groups, and maybe what's her name? Gillian. I forgot to say it now. Just off Gillian Keegan. Maybe
Gillian Keegan.
Keegan, yes. So she's come into the post. Let's give her a dues. Maybe she's actually spoke to the right people. She's gone to the right meetings, and she's actually kind of looked ahead and gone, well, actually, if we do that, if we pull that lever, this happens. If we pull this lever, they're affected. If we pull this lever, so actually, she might be trapped, and it might be this moment of time.
A bit of a reset.
Yeah. There's a current feeling in kind of economics, just to not bore everyone, but in 1920s they talked about that there's actually a kind of reset, and the 20th century actually started in 1920. There's a bit of a kind of paradigm shift. Maybe 2022-23 is the paradigm shift. Maybe there's that thing of actually this is where we get to for the 21st, 22nd century, what this actually looks like, because it's not fulfilling a lot of purposes at the moment.
To back up your point, again, how these stories are connected. Over 500,000 young people are not in work or education and are not looking for employment. The highest number in 5 years. Between July and September, 490,000 16 to 24-year-olds were classed as not in employment, NEET, or in education. So there's your NEET. Or economically active. According to the Labour Party analysis for Office of National Statistics data, the increase comes from following of the winding up of the government's £2 billion Kickstart scheme, which was launched in 2020 to help 16 to 24-year-olds at risk of long-term unemployment by subsidising 6-month job placements. There's back to what you were saying about life skills. In February, the Public Accounts Committee, the PSE, ruled the scheme had supported far fewer young people than predicted, quote unquote, with a chaotic delivery. So again, they had the right idea, they just couldn't execute it. And the result is there's a group of 490,000 young people in our country at the moment who are probably sitting in their Xboxes right now. And I have to say, are they failing? Are they being failed?
Yeah.
Or is something going wrong in the 6th wealthiest country in the world where we have 490,000 young people sitting there with their hands on their hand? And it's not as if, here's the real thing. There's well over 1 million vacancies. Now, are they capable of filling those vacancies? Or here's the other side of it, do they really want to fill those vacancies? Because as you say about the confidence, the social mobility, the desire, the drive, something's gone wrong there. Something very fundamentally is wrong and we could blame the young people, because I know some of the newspapers will go, young people are work shy, this, that, the other. And then they go for that stereotype, and I don't think that's fair.
No.
Because we have to say to ourselves, if I plant if I put something in a wrong plant, in the wrong pot, with the wrong soil, and it doesn't grow, I could blame the plant.
Yeah, the plant didn't do what you wanted.
Yeah, the plant, it's a terrible plant. But if I don't water it, nurture it, feed it, give it the right light and energy, then it won't bloom. And I'm sorry, we've got to look to that and stop blaming the kids and say, well, yeah, they have to take some responsibility. Absolutely. And so do their parents and so does society. But we have to look at how we have helped create. And then what are we doing? There's the problem. And there was a solution. And now you ask yourself a question. 490 young people, 1,000 young people sitting in their hands. How many of those will go into nefarious schemes? How many of those can go into the black economy? How many of those will be on benefits? That has massive implications for our society. And yet, There it is. It's exactly what you're talking about. That education has not allowed these young people to thrive. It's not on. Um, let's suggest then, as regards the white paper, the government is talking about still keeping elements of this white paper. They're not going to put the schools bill through. The schools bill would allow them the kind of legislation to force the agenda. They still have the schools bill, which will still be in the statute books, which allows them to continue the policies. So what you have is a situation where they're going to continue the policies of increase in multi-academy trusts, but they don't have a stick to beat you in. So they're going to try possibly the carrot a bit more, or they haven't abandoned it. So again, it's a bit confusing. Of we are trying to predict now what next 2023 is going to hold.
Yeah.
Will more schools convert to multi-academy trust? Because if you're a governor of a school now, saying to yourself, my local school, you now say to yourself, I don't need to move to a multi-academy trust, therefore I'm not. So for me, this is a bit like when you say scrapped or mothballed. This is the type of thing that slowly kills a policy by death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, but so I just wonder sometimes if when they're coming up with these policies, who is in the room with them, and I think that's been the problem.
Civil services.
Yeah, exactly.
They're advisors. They're special advisors.
But we know, don't we? Because we discussed this last week of where that pool of people is coming from, and what is their kind of view on these things. Are they the right people to be in the room? Have they got the experience? I mean, you wouldn't. I mean, if you look at the amount of people who have been education secretary, it's almost like a scattergun approach, isn't it? To anybody that wants the job or who is able to the job. It's not necessarily they've got a particular knowledge or understanding of something else. You wouldn't put someone in as CEO of your company, would you? Who didn't have a natural existence within that field, just to kind of randomly kind of put them in place. So I sometimes wonder whether the actual people in the room really kind of understand or comprehend kind of what's going on.
You need a broad. I mean, go back to it like my governing body, and one of the reasons why I love being a school governor is that I saw myself as the representative of the shop steward, and sometimes a little bit of sway, which I liked. But that's one of the reasons why I went to my colleagues and said, elect me as your governor. I have no problem being the person in the room that raises their hand and go, why are we doing this? What is the purpose? But equally, I had such a candid, I really had a very a radical candor with my governing body at that time. They'd ask me, what does the staff think about that? And of course, I would never say individual staff members, but I was able to communicate, link between staff to the governing body of this is how the staff feel about this policy, they don't like it. And of course, I would never go into governors and speak on their behalf unless I'd spoken to the crux of, and it afforded me that position to grease the wheels, to be able to say, this is how your staff feel. And sometimes for the head teacher, I would always give him a heads up and say, look, when this comes up, I'm not going to undermine you, head teacher. I'm not going to, this is not personal. This is how your staff feel. And over time, I built a good relationship with him, an honest relationship of almost, look, I don't want to take this into the staff governing body. Can we have a conversation about this now, before? And that means, I didn't undermine him. Equally, he finds out what staff are really thinking, and sometimes him and I were on the same page. And it allowed us to sort of create a kind of, this is what we both want. We want the school to function. We want staff to be happy. We want people to come to work. We want people to feel safe. We want the kids to do well. We want parents to be happy about the school. We all wanted the same thing. But we all had different agendas in the sense of the different people we're looking after. But that's what it worked. It worked because it was collaborative. It worked because I was coming from a different point of view, representing a different group of people and adding to the mix and the spice. Some of the new governing bodies, like in multi-academy trusts, was diversity. We're in the governing body. I think your school has to have local people who have a vested interest in the school. And I say it again, I've never seen so many complaints in the media, which actually doesn't help our profession, because it's like sometimes it's a policy of a certain school, a certain trust, and then you get the teachers get it, and you're like, well, we're just instituting the policy of our employer, not the government. So I think that some things are broken there, where we are paying the price for in our profession, and I think that's fair enough. going back to your point about apprenticeships,
Mm.
new research reveals that overall number of apprentices starts with chart the London School of Economics and University, Southern Trust, Education Trust, found that poorer school leavers are particularly underrepresented in higher level apprenticeships, which is exactly what we're talking about the area and the school used to teach.
Mhm.
The research also shows that a higher proportion of students taking an ordinary degree had been on free school meals than those who started a degree in apprenticeships last year. The share of apprenticeships in all levels to private areas of the country decreased from 26% rather than increase in affluent areas. Reports in prosperous areas have benefited disproportionately from the expansion of degree apprenticeships. Strikingly higher and degree apprenticeships are not common among students and university degree. It's hard to see higher and degree apprenticeships as a route to widen opportunities. And that's so even that avenue where you have your working class child gets an apprenticeship and is able to get an apprenticeship and a degree, that route starts to be narrower and narrower. Again, everywhere you turn, you have a liberal turn. That means that we are getting these apprenticeships from backgrounds that we benefit from. So all the evidence is there, all the evidence we see is there. We do need to have a root and branch conversation about what the function of education is,
Yeah.
and I think we need a plan. And at the moment, we're coming full circle, is we have everything on hold. We have grammar schools on hold, we have private schools on hold, we have multi-academy trusts
On hold.
on hold,
I can do the Labour thing where they shout out there from the bench.
on hold,
On hold.
But the reality is this, and we started to talk about 2023. What is the reality of current situation in education? Recruitment, retention, pay and conditions, SEN, children's mental health, examination systems. I mean, seriously, you look at all of the things that are going on, and we need instant responses. We need instant fixes to long-term problems.
Mhm.
But I take your point. Maybe the education secretary is waiting for those long-term fixes.
Yeah.
But the longer that is waited for, the more desperate the situation becomes. You're talking even things like your heating and your energy bills.
Yeah.
So we see, for instance, like government has announced that schools and colleges in England are set to receive a share of £500 million to spend on energy efficiency upgrades, which could include installing better heating controls. The funding means an average primary school will see probably £16,000, a secondary school with £42,000. That's great. But really, that's £500 million to make our schools more energy efficient. Versus, a lot of evidence suggests we need £15 billion.
Well, 500 million doesn't even build your school. Does it? I mean, how much a large comprehensive school to build? I mean,
This strikes to me like during the COVID crisis. Instead of actually sending us ventilation systems, we got sent air monitors. We got sent monitors to monitor the air quality, but actually no way to change the air quality. So there is a recognition that there is an issue there, but there's a small amount of funding, and it's the same with the white paper. The government would say it's putting an extra $5 billion into education, and the education budget is higher than it's been for a long while. But the demand is such, when you have not funded things successfully over years, you have latent funding gaps. There's things that you put off doing. It's a bit like my house. If I didn't repair my house for 20 years, I wouldn't come along and say, here's one repair. What you have there is you have 20 years worth of repairs that you have to upgrade before you come and do the repair that you need to do. Same as your car. When you put your car in for service, you didn't put your car in for service for 4 or 5 years. You could expect a hefty service bill.
that's right. Yeah.
But that's why you put your car
It
in.
accumulates, doesn't it?
Well, what do? You put your car into a service, don't you, every year? And if you look after your car and you maintain it and you buy the best parts and you don't drive it too badly, your service shouldn't be too hard. Maybe you get unlucky sometimes. But that's the problem with education. When you have not underfunded it for so long, when you haven't neglected it in such a way, and you've done what you've done, which we know where we are, then more than £500 million is going to be needed to make schools more energy efficient, because that's going to mean £16,000 for a primary school would buy what? A new boiler, maybe, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
What about the windows?
Yeah.
What about the insulation?
It's kind of pointless, isn't it?
And especially if you're in a porta cabin, especially if you're in an old red brick Victorian building, which has got more leaks than the Titanic.
Yeah.
So overall, I think it's a confusing picture within education at the moment.
We need a plan. We need a plan. We need a plan. We need a strategy. We need to be long term. We need to know the direction of travel.
Strategic.
We need to know what that looks like, and then like if you're planning anything, you put the plan in place, don't you? And then then you start to build the resources. Like, I literally do this with my students. You know, you choose. They do a BTEC business. They do an exam where they have to kind of choose an option. They then have to look at how they resource it. What's the human, physical, the time that's required. So children.
Are we talking a Maslow hierarchy of school needs?
Well, we need something, don't we? But we've got a couple of minutes left, Brent. So
one last story I want
thing
to highlight, and then we'll start wrapping up. Pupils to be served more frozen food to save money. Food wholesale firm Bird Food have published advice for schools on stretching their budgets, which includes swapping fresh food for frozen and consider using cheaper cuts of meat to save cost. The chief executive said earlier this year that soaring inflation will lead to some difficult questions and decisions for schools and caterers. Either they're going to serve smaller portions or use cheaper ingredients, which isn't going to be good for the children. Separate research by the school catering body, LECA, found that food prices in school canteens had risen by 30% since May. You see, in my Maslow hierarchy of needs, I think that is extremely important. And I know that there is a bill being tabled this week about free school meals. Because when it comes down to it, what we're talking about desire is education policy. That's at the top end. That's at the real minutiae, the vision, the philosophy, the actual government policies. But when it actually comes down to what's going on in schools, all this impacts on the day-to-day business of how the schools are run, how the heating is kept on, how do we recruit the teachers, how do we keep the children happy, safe. It's just, we are in survival mode, aren't we? We're in survival mode. So I would say that future 2023 has to be twofold. Our education secretary and the powers that be, the people running education, need to instantly respond to these desires and needs, from budget funding to teacher recruitment to the teachers' pay, the strikes. These are the immediate in-tray items. The other thing they need to do is come up with their philosophy and their plan and the long-term strategic vision for education. And number three, if I was to give them any advice, I would prefer them to stay away from the culture wars. And I would prefer them to stay away from these headline-grabbing, ridiculous stuff that we see about privilege and everything else. I think our education secretary would be better versed in staying closer to the actual realities of the things that are needed, rather than the headline-grabbing education minister comes out with this. And I would say that from any of the political parties or anybody involved in education. The desire is there for us to get the Maslow hierarchy of needs: the food, the money, the security, and the survival first. Then I suppose, once we've got that, we can start to talk about the long-term strategic future and vision of how we organise our schools. And at the moment, I don't see much information coming out on that, except the odd tokenism of £500 million for more energy efficiency, which I would also say, will that ever be delivered? And when will that be delivered? Much like many other things, we've seen a lot of broken promises. So it's a bit of a grim.
So it's a good job that Marcus Rashford is now free.
Okay, well, I like the way you're putting a positive spin on last night.
I'll just say one thing about frozen food. I've just converted to frozen sprouts, and I love them.
Oh, that's a whole thing. Sprouts,
to
sprout or not to sprout.
Maybe we'll talk about that next week.
Sprouts or not. I'm a sprout fan. Many cabbages. I think they're a wonderful food.
Let's earn our money.
Let's have a mention of our sponsors. So our sponsor is John Catt Education. The show is brought to you by them and in partnership with them. They're a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. And please check out their latest releases. Some cracking books. Adam and I were talking about having a read of some of their catalogue.
There was a PE one this week that looked really good, actually. I forwarded it on to my colleague, a PE teacher. I forget the name of it, but it looks excellent about kind of happiness in PE or something like happiness in physical education, something like that. It looked really good. The summary of that looked really good. Winning.
So visit johncattbookshop.com. That's JONCATTBOOKSHOP.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. So our second sponsor is Witherslack Group, and they're a leading provider of our specialist education and care. They need more people like you to help them achieve more. So at Witherslack, you'll be given all the resources and support you need, offer a clear path to career progression, and rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. I might think about that, actually. Witherslack currently have some fantastic career opportunities available, to apply for it, please check out www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers. Don't forget that we can download this as podcast. You can listen back at your own leisure. You can, of course, comment on any of this as well.
Look at the second link that you posted because of our mucking around earlier.
Yes, we have plenty of links posted to some of the academic background and some of the extra reading to what we presented today as well.
Maybe we should flip learning. We should put the earlier so our listeners can do a bit of research before. Bit of flip learning.
Should probably, but then remember that we're a bit organic. Sometimes
we've
the show evolves.
We've got to do our homework before.
Well, we do, but the show evolves, and that's the whole beautiful thing about it. It should evolve naturally and organically. Don't forget to check out some of the other podcasts and some of the other broadcasts from some of our excellent presenters. And also, you may want to join us at Teachers Talk Radio. Become one with the Borg, and you will be assimilated, and your essence will be added to the blob that is Teachers Talk Radio. Essence. Your essence will be added to the collective.
Yeah. What essence have you got? Is it gone Christmas? Is it gone like cinnamon?
No, my essence is just pure firewater. My friend, my essence is like Irish distilled whiskey.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like Neil Nielsen on A Good Mood.
Yeah,
you know, I will find you. So my essence is probably. Somebody said to me once, "What would your aura be? Would it be like yellow or would it be like green?" It's like, no, it's just fiery,
just pure
bright red. You know.
Right.
Just the way you want to be. But don't forget to you might want to come join us. You might want to host this. It's really good fun. It's excellent CV on your CV as well if you want to do something like this in the future. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. This has been a Teachers Talk Radio production with me, Brett Poland, and
me, Adam Spence, and wrap up warm next week. -10-ish on average, -9.
Let's talk Christmas next week.
Or is it the Daily Express? It's going to snow. Which they do about once a week. Anyway, nice one. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.